let's keep this just between us because it's really kind of subversive. The fact is, I don't really like photo gear. I don't like buying new gear. I don't like carrying a lot of gear. The industry hates people like me. I'm pretty old school, so when I'm using a camera like my Peak Z, I like to carry around just 3 basic lenses, a wide angle, a normal, and a telephoto. And they don't even need to be the newest lenses because those types of lenses are pretty well developed and they've been around for a long time. Suppose I never bought a new M-mount lens again. Suppose I just got by with the old ones I had for a long time. How much would I really give up? Well, here's an experiment to find out. To be honest, lens quality often isn't my top priority, but one place where I really do pay attention is when shooting close-up, tightly cropped headshots. I want to see well-defined eyelashes, skin and lip textures, and jewelry details. In other words, I want all my headshots to look like this one. But I can't shoot a professional model every time I want to compare lenses, so I came up with a stand-in for this experiment. The book spines on this shelf give a range of details and textures that correspond reasonably well with those of a portrait. I did test every lens at every aperture, but I decided to zero in on just 2 options. f2, which is about what I typically use in natural indoor light, and f5.6, which is where I like to be for a studio portrait with lights. Let's look at the 35mm lenses first. My modern lens is an f1.5 Nocton. It's beautifully finished, operates smoothly, and weighs in at a reasonable 290 grams. My vintage lens is Canon's 35mm f2, which most mark experts regard as the best 35mm rangefinder lens Canon ever made. It was one of their last rangefinder designs, released in 1962. It's beautifully made, and it's the lightest lens in the whole Canon rangefinder system at a tiny 108 grams. Looking at the full-frame images, you're probably not going to notice much difference, especially after YouTube rounds off most of the fine details. But when you zoom into 300%, you can start to see slight differences. For example, the texture of the fabric book spine is a bit more defined by the modern lens on the left. Frankly, I'm not thrilled with either of them though, and that brings up an important point. Lens designs are always compromises, and it's possible that the designers of these 2 lenses didn't give top priority to how they'd perform at this close 1 meter distance. Close the lenses down to f5.6 though, and they both clean up tremendously. The modern lens on the left is crisp, and the vintage lens on the right isn't far behind. I'd say the modern lens is a bit better, but it's a close call. Now let's move on to the 50mm normal lenses. Our modern 50mm Nocton on the left is again beautifully finished and reasonably compact. The 50mm f1.4 on the right is what you'd have bought back in 1960 if you wanted Canon's overall best 50mm lens for your Model P or 7. They made more expensive, wider aperture lenses that were bigger and not quite as sharp, and they made less expensive, smaller aperture lenses that were more compact, but the 51.4 was the sweet spot, which is why they ended up producing 110,000 of them. Nowadays, most lens buffs would say that the Canon is a bit softer and more flary than a first-rate modern lens such as the Nocton. I wouldn't disagree. At 300%, you can definitely see crisper details from the modern lens on the left. Although it's not a huge difference, and people shooting on film rather than digital might not see it at all. Close them down to f5.6 and the modern Nocton pulls out a clear lead. This is one case where I'd say buying the new lens is definitely justified by its better performance. Now let's move on to the medium tellies, or what people used to call portrait lenses, because they work so well for tightly cropped headshots. Our modern lens, the f2 Apo Ultron, is the newest design here, appearing in 2005. The Ultron is up against the oldest lens in this comparison, the 85mm f1.5 that Canon first released in 1952. and it is a chonko. It's almost twice as heavy as the Ultron, and it's bigger in every dimension. True, its maximum aperture is a full stop larger, although I'd only use that in emergency situations because it usually doesn't give enough depth of field to keep both eyes in focus in a portrait, for example. So what does all that esoterica get you? Uncropped, there's not a lot of difference to see, although do keep in mind that because the Ultron is a 90mm and the Canon is an 85mm, the Ultron produces a slightly larger image size. Zoom in to 300% and you do see a bit of advantage for the Ultron at f2. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on YouTube, but on the book spine labeled Art, you can clearly see the individual halftone dots in the modern lens on the left. On the Canon lens, you can also see the dots, but they're not as clear. Close both lenses down to f5.6 though, and you need to stop a moment and take off your hat to Ito Hiroshi, who designed the Canon lens 73 years ago. Yes, the Ultron has superb texture and detail, but the Canon does too. I'd call it a dead heat at this aperture. I'm still glad I bought the Ultron because it's so much smaller and lighter. Plus, it lets the Canon 85 stay in its natural habitat on my 1958 vintage Canon camera. But in terms of performance, I probably didn't really need to buy a new lens here. Okay, I admit we haven't talked about flare control, close focusing, and other places where a modern lens might have definite advantages. And we haven't talked about the fact that when you buy a modern lens, you don't have to worry about fungus damage, oily diaphragm blades, and that kind of stuff. But I still say that if you've got an older lens and you're pretty happy with how it performs, getting the newest, allegedly greatest lens maybe isn't going to give you the kind of night and day performance improvement that the pundits want you to think it will. But that's just me. After all, you don't want to pay too much attention to Subversive.